I've always been drawn to the unexplained. It's what led me to become a journalist, specializing in the peculiar and the uncharted. My latest assignment had brought me to a small, seemingly insignificant town, tucked away from the hustle of modern life. But beneath its quiet exterior, the town harbored a series of inexplicable events that had caught my attention. A spate of alleged alien sightings. I remember the chill that ran down my spine as I drove into the town for the first time. The streets were eerily quiet, the houses looked like they hadn't changed in decades, and the people there was something unsettling about their stares. It was as if they harbored a secret, a truth they were too afraid to share with an outsider. My first stop was the local diner, a quaint little establishment that looked like it belonged in a 1950s movie set. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a warm yet guarded smile, served me the strongest cup of coffee I'd ever tasted. As I sipped, I began to chat with her, trying to glean any information I could about the strange occurrences. It was here that I met Mr. Hawkins, an elderly gentleman who claimed to have lived in the town his entire life. His eyes, clouded with age, seemed to hold a depth of knowledge that intrigued me. As we talked, he revealed that the town had always been a hotspot for otherworldly activity, but there was more to it than just aliens. Before he left, he handed me an old tattered manuscript, his pages yellowed with age. "This might help you understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That night, in the small room I rented at the local inn, I pored over the manuscript. It was a collection of ancient texts and folklore, describing celestial beings not as visitors from another planet, but as demons in disguise. The descriptions were vivid and terrifying, detailing their ability to manipulate and torment humans. As I delved deeper into the manuscript, a sense of unease crept over me. The wind outside howled, as if carrying voices from another world. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell into a fitful sleep. That's when the dream, or perhaps nightmare, began. I found myself in a surreal landscape, under sky torn asunder by streaks of unnatural colors. Before me stood creatures, twisted and malevolent, their eyes glowing with a sinister light. They whispered in a language I couldn't understand, yet their intent was clear. They were not of this world, and their purposes were far from benevolent. I awoke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The dream had felt so real, so visceral, that I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just a figment of my imagination. I knew then that this town held secrets far darker than I could have imagined, and I was determined to uncover them. Little did I know, my investigation was about to lead me into realms of terror that would challenge everything I believed about the world. The morning after the nightmare was bleak. The sky, a monotonous gray, seemed to press down upon the town, mirroring my own unease. With the manuscript tucked under my arm, I set out to unravel the enigma shrouding this place. My first stop was the local library, a building as old as the town itself, with dusty shelves and a musty smell that spoke of forgotten secrets. As I scoured through local archives and historical records, I began to piece together a disturbing pattern. The sightings and strange occurrences had been happening for decades, perhaps even longer. Each account was eerily similar tales of abductions, inexplicable loss of time, and harrowing experiences that defied logic. Yet, something didn't fit. The descriptions of the so-called aliens in these accounts bore a striking resemblance to the demonic entities described in the ancient manuscript. Later that day, I met with a woman named Mrs. Thompson, a local who claimed her husband had been taken years ago. Her story was a chilling echo of the manuscript's tales. She spoke of her husband waking up screaming from nightmarish visions, of shadows moving in the dark, and of a night when he vanished without a trace, only to return days later, a changed, distant man. It was during this conversation that I first heard of Father Daniels, an old priest who had served the town for decades. Mrs. Thompson suggested that he might know more about the town's hidden history. Intrigued, I decided to pay him a visit. Father Daniels lived in a modest house adjacent to the town's old church. He was a frail man, his eyes tired but sharp. When I mentioned the manuscript and the alien sightings, his expression grew sullen. He told me a tale that sent chills down my spine. "These beings, they are not what they seem," he said in a hushed tone. "They have been here since time immemorial, masquerading as gods, spirits, and now, aliens. They are demons, feeding on our fears, manipulating us for their dark purposes." As I left Father Daniel's house, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town. My mind raced with the implications of what I'd learned. It wasn't just a story of aliens, it was a tale of ancient, malevolent beings whose deception was woven into the very fabric of this town. That night, as I walked back to the inn, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The streets were deserted, the silence broken only by my footsteps echoing against the buildings. I looked up at the night sky, a tapestry of stars and darkness, and wondered what horrors lay hidden behind its serene facade. It was then that I noticed something peculiar in a nearby field, a pattern of lights, flickering in the darkness. Curiosity overcoming my fear, I ventured closer. What I found sent a wave of dread through me. It was a crop circle, large and intricate, the design matching the symbols in the manuscript. Symbols of summoning, of rituals older than the town itself. As I stood there, alone in the field, the chilling realization dawned on me. The town was not just a hotspot for alien activity, it was a stronghold of something far more ancient and sinister. And I had just scratched the surface of its dark secret. The discovery of the crop circle with symbols that mirrored the ancient manuscript had left me reeling. I knew then that the mystery I was unraveling was more profound and terrifying than I had initially thought. These weren't just random occurrences or simple alien sightings, there was a pattern, a sinister design at play. The following day, I decided to delve deeper into the town's history. My search led me to the local museum, a repository of the town's past. The curator, a gaunt man with an air of disinterest, allowed me to peruse the archives. There, amidst old photographs and artifacts, I found more evidence of the town's eerie past: newspaper clippings about unexplained phenomena, personal diaries describing nightmarish encounters, and ancient artifacts bearing the same unsettling symbols I had seen in the crop circle. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, fitting into a horrifying picture. The town, for generations, had been a nexus for these demonic entities. They had insinuated themselves into the fabric of the town, influencing its history and its people. Later that day, my investigation took a more harrowing turn. I interviewed more townsfolk, each recounting their own chilling experiences. One story, in particular, stood out: a young woman who had disappeared for a week and returned with no memory of where she had been, but with a terror in her eyes that spoke volumes. As night fell, I found myself drawn back to the field where I had discovered the crop circle. The air was charged with an unspoken energy, a palpable sense of dread. I stood there, in the center of the circle, feeling the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes upon me. It was then that I noticed something in the soil at my feet: a small, metallic object partially buried. I dug it out, revealing a strange amulet adorned with the same sinister symbols. As I held it, a sense of unease washed over me, as if the amulet itself was imbued with a malevolent force. My mind raced with questions. Were these symbols a form of communication? A way to summon these demonic beings? Or perhaps a mark of their presence? The sound of rustling grass broke my reverie. I looked up, my heart pounding, to see shadows moving at the edge of the field. They were formless, yet sentient, encroaching upon me with an intent that felt anything but benign. In a panic, I pocketed the amulet and ran. The shadows seemed to chase me, stretching towards me with tendrils of darkness. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the inn, locking the door behind me, my breath ragged with fear. That night, I barely slept, my mind tormented by nightmares of twisted figures and whispered threats. The amulet lay on the bedside table, its presence a constant reminder of the horror that lurked just beyond the veneer of normality in this cursed town. As dawn broke, I knew one thing for certain. I was dealing with a force beyond my understanding, a darkness that had been lurking in this town for centuries. And I had just begun to uncover its terrifying truth. The next morning dawned grim and overcast, mirroring the turmoil in my mind. After the harrowing experiences of the previous night, I was more determined than ever to uncover the truth, no matter how dark or deep it went. The amulet, now lying inert on my bedside table, seemed to be a key piece in this twisted puzzle. With a sense of grim resolve, I returned to the field where the crop circle lay. The light of day made it seem less ominous, but the unease in my gut told me that the horror I had glimpsed was real and ever-present. As I examined the crop circle more closely in daylight, I realized that it wasn't just a random pattern. The design was purposeful, intricate, a diagram of something ritualistic and ancient. It was then that I noticed a small, secluded path leading away from the field into the dense woods that bordered the town. Compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, I followed the path, the amulet safely tucked in my pocket. The woods were silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. After what felt like hours, I came upon a clearing. And there it was, an altar of sorts, made of stones and covered in the same symbols that were now hauntingly familiar. The ground around it was scorched, as if by intense heat. It was clear that this was the site of something unnatural, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. I heard them before I saw them, a low, guttural chanting that seemed to resonate from the very earth. Hidden behind a thick copse of trees, I watched in horror as robed figures emerged from the shadows, encircling the altar. They began a ritual, their voices rising in a cacophony that chilled my soul. I watched, frozen in place, as the air around the altar began to shimmer and warp. The amulet in my pocket grew hot, almost burning my skin. The robed figures chanting reached a fever pitch, and then, in a burst of eldritch energy, a figure appeared on the altar. It was like nothing I had ever seen, a being of shadows and light, its form constantly shifting, its eyes burning with an infernal fire. The realization hit me like a physical blow. These weren't aliens, they were demons, entities from another plane of existence. The ritual reached its climax, and the creature on the altar let out a sound that was part scream, part roar, a sound that seemed to echo through the very fabric of reality. It was a call, a summons, and I knew instinctively that it was calling others of its kind. In a panic, I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling from the revelation. I had to warn someone, tell the world what was happening in this cursed town. But who would believe me? Who would believe that what we thought were aliens were in fact demons, beings of ancient and malevolent intent? As I made my way back through the woods, the weight of what I had witnessed bore down on me. The town, its people, the entire world, was in danger, and I was the only one who knew the terrifying truth. I returned to the inn in a state of shock, the images of the ritual and the demonic entity etched into my mind. The town, bathed in the fading light of dusk, felt more ominous than ever. I knew I had to act, but the enormity of what I had uncovered left me feeling powerless. In my room, I paced back and forth, trying to formulate a plan. The amulet, now lying on the table, seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy. I knew it was a significant piece of this puzzle, a link to the demonic entities that had infiltrated the town. I decided to document everything I had seen and learned. Pulling out my laptop, I began typing furiously, detailing the sightings, the manuscript, the crop circle, and the ritual in the woods. I described the demonic entity, the chanting robed figures, and the terrifying reality that these aliens were something far more sinister. But as I wrote, a creeping sense of dread took hold of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the inn, every whisper of the wind, seemed to carry a sinister undertone. The isolation of the town, once just an inconvenience, now felt like a trap, closing in on me. I decided to send my findings to my editor, hoping that making this information public would expose the truth and bring help. But when I tried to send the email, I discovered that the internet was down. My phone, too, was strangely devoid of signal. It was as if the town itself was cutting me off from the outside world. That night, sleep eluded me. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a whisper of danger. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, leaving me in a state of constant fear. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, jumping at every creak of the old inn. In the early hours of the morning, a knock at my door jolted me from my restless vigil. My heart pounding, I approached cautiously. Peering through the peephole, I saw nothing but the dimly lit hallway. The sense of dread intensified. I knew opening the door could be a mistake, but the need to know was overpowering. With a deep breath, I opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty, but there, on the floor, was an envelope. Picking it up, I found it contained a single photograph, an old, sepia-toned image showing the town's founding members. But what chilled me to the bone was the presence of the demonic entities, standing alongside them, as if part of the community. The message was clear. The town and these creatures were inextricably linked, their fates intertwined for generations. And now, I was caught in the middle of this unholy alliance. As the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I knew I had to leave, to escape this town and its dark secrets. But even as I planned my departure, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The town, and the demons that lurked within, wouldn't let me go so easily. And even if I did manage to leave, the haunting truth would follow me, a constant shadow at the edge of my mind. The morning light did little to dispel the shadows that now clung to my mind. With the photograph in hand, a tangible proof of the town's dark lineage, I packed my belongings, the amulet included. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of the unspeakable truths it represented. I left the inn at the break of dawn, the streets deserted and eerily silent. The town, once just a stop on my journey for the truth, now felt like a living, breathing entity, watching my every move with unseen eyes. As I drove through the town, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being followed. In the rearview mirror, I caught glimpses of shadows that seemed to move on their own, disappearing as soon as I tried to focus on them. Every turn I took, every street I drove down, felt like a step deeper into a labyrinth designed to keep me trapped. The further I drove, the more the landscape seemed to warp and twist. Roads that should have led out of town circled back on themselves, leading me to familiar landmarks I had passed multiple times. It was as if the town itself was reshaping, preventing my escape. In a final desperate attempt, I abandoned my car and continued on foot, the photograph and the manuscript clutched tightly in my bag. But the town, with its tendrils of fear and madness, was relentless. Houses seemed to leer at me, their windows like watching eyes. The wind carried whispers that sounded like distant, mocking laughter. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost its meaning. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, every sound a potential threat, every shadow lurking terror. Finally, when my body and mind could take no more, I found myself standing at the edge of town, the boundaries seemingly unchanged. It was then that the realization hit me like a cold wave: there was no leaving this place. The town and its demonic inhabitants had claimed me, just as they had claimed countless others before. I understood then that my role was not to expose the truth, but to become a part of it. My experiences, my fear, my very sanity were now threads in the town's tapestry of horror. As I walked back into the heart of the town, the photograph and manuscript in hand, I accepted my fate. The truth I had sought was not something to be exposed, but a reality to be endured. The demons, the rituals, the unending cycle of terror, they were all now part of me. And so, I write this account not as a warning, nor as a call for help, but as a testament to the inescapable truth. The town, with its ancient, malevolent secrets, continues to exist, hidden in plain sight. And I, once an outsider seeking the truth, am now a part of its enigmatic, eternal horror.